Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for BRICS The Catalyst for the invitation. My speech today, or tonight, is the agri-food question in China and its implications for Brazil. However, these are nearly two separate topics that are interlinked in reality, but I will try to speak more deeply on the first issue, on the agri-food question in China. And if I have time enough, or in the debate session, we can go further into the implications of China agri-food transformations for Brazil. Just to make a small propaganda of my last book, Agriculture, Food and Rural Development in China and Brazil, Comparative Institutional Analysis, that was published by apresentada in Brazil, in Portuguese. And one of my latest papers, in which I, together with my colleagues, Webinários Jr. and Tomás Mifani, we analyzed the rise of China into the international food regime, review of the Brazil-China soil complex and both global strategy in the southern corner, especially Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. Well, let's begin. First thing to state very briefly is a short periodization of agrarian change in China, or stated in another way, a brief periodization of China's history from perspectives of the rural. So we can say China had modern China or New China could be divided. The history of New China could be divided into three big periods, and each of these big three periods could be subdivided in some phases or moments. From 1944 to 1953, China went through the socialist revolution and establishment of the new democracy, which in the agrarian ground was based on a radical land reform and the setting up of a household-based peasant agriculture and the extinction of old landvarism. From 53 to 61, former peasant agriculture was progressively joined together in the process of agricultural collectivization. First, it was established the mutual aid teams without changing the property structure. But soon this process was advancing. It was established the lower level cooperatives and then the higher level cooperatives. And in a few years, it was established the people's communes that were in general very huge. We have after some point this called Great Leap Forward, which had some setbacks, important setbacks in agriculture, particularly the Great Famine. It was a great tragedy, but the Chinese government and organization of Chinese agriculture was quick to made some kind of quick responses to these problems. And in a few years, it was made some adjustments. The main thing was that the former huge communes were a little bit decentralized, with the brigades established as the main level of production, organization, and accounting as well. Furthermore, it was established the so-called three small freedoms. That is, the establishment of small plots, private plots for the peasants that they could use beyond the collective agriculture, some kind of, let's say, artisanal cottage industries, and the last three, the third of small freedoms, were the kind of farmers markets. All these changes allow for the community system to work relatively well during this period. But of course, have some criticisms and some issues regarding disputes in political power, and also some problems in productivity, which led to the reform opening up since the rise of the Deng power after the death of Mao Zedong, to make the first big reform was exactly the one in agriculture, the politicization process, and the establishment of the household responsibility system from 1979, which its first round ended up in 1993. While the 80s the 80s are considered years of great progress in China's agriculture, the 90s are more problematic. In general, people refer to the 90s as the deepening of the so-called heavy peasant burden, especially regarding taxes, and also labor problems and environmental problems, which led to the rise of a lot of mass incidents that are basically protests in rural areas, and the emergence of what economist Wen Tianjin called the San Non Wen Ti, the three agrarian problems, the problem of agriculture, of the peasants, and of the countryside. So the main response, there were a lot of policy changes during this period, but the main response that starts in the 2000s and settled by 2006 is the abolition of rural taxes. In late period, during the governments of Hu Jintao and Xi Jinping, there are further acceleration of reforms in rural areas. First, with the project called Building a New Socialist Countryside, still in 2006, and a lot of policy measures like the idea of capital going to the countryside as a reverse of the former policy in which agriculture was the resources from agriculture, or like labor and agricultural products, were pumped up from agriculture to the urban areas, to the industrial sector. The tide was changing. This was the main idea. Instead of resources going from agriculture to the city, the capital was going to the countryside. And this process also led to a trend of promotion of agricultural modernization and scaling up of agriculture. And since 2013, the last few years, China's countryside has been seeing a complex and but sweeping trend of land transfers. The former individual peasants who hold collective land was started to make contracts with third parties, sometimes cooperatives, sometimes their neighbors, and even sometimes private companies, which gather together this land rights for a definite period and establish contracts of land transfers to make kind of agribusiness operations. So in this period, it's also received a process of expansion of agribusiness capital into the countryside, and on the other hand, a process of rural social differentiation. However, the government has been also, since 2017, established a new policy directive called the Rural Revitalization Strategy. Beside this historical background, here it begins my research properly. My question is, how do the transformations and trends observed in China's agri-food system and rural social relations affect its trajectory of economic development and international rise? My hypothesis is that the recent dynamics of rural development in China seek to respond to a set of challenges triggered by the shift from the classic agrarian question to a new agri-food question. So the objective of this presentation and of the paper on which it is based is to analyze the key problematics of this agri-food question in China today. Well, I will not talk about data and methodology because we will see. I will go very brief on theoretical issues because I don't think it's the most important thing here, but I rely strongly on the Marxist tradition. In Marxism, agrarian question is usually understood in three different senses or meanings. It is well known that Marx theorized about land rent and about the primitive accumulation and the role of agrarian relations in the transition from feudalism to capitalism. But what about the modern agrarian question or agrarian change? It was up to the followers of Marx to establish a more concrete theorization about that. Engels understood the agrarian question in a more political sense about state building. Kautsky and Lenin in a more sociological sense about rural social differentiation and development of capitalist relations and agriculture. Karin and Preobrajenski understood the agrarian question in a more economic sense, like the extraction and appropriation and transfer of agricultural surpluses through the process of industrialization, so-called Soviet socialist primitive accumulation. And recently, one important scholar in agrarian political economy called Terence Myers, he developed the idea of different paths of agrarian transition in comparative perspective. So he analyzed the case of the US, of Russia, of England, France, and some East Asian countries like Japan, South Korea, in comparison, and understand like capitalism. His main thesis is that some kind of transitions are capitalism from above, some other capitalism from below, and also some mediations of it. I will not go deep into that now, but I will use this idea of these three senses and will resignify it as the three problematics of the contemporary agri-food question. So my three problematics are: first, capital accumulation. It's about the place of agriculture and the agri-food system and the economic dynamics, especially the intersectoral linkages of agribusiness, the relative importance of domestic and foreign markets, the international financial and investment flows. The second problematic is the social reproduction, about the levels of nutrition transition and its implications for the eating habits of urban consumers and urban middle classes particularly, as well as the forms and degrees of commodification of agriculture and rural livelihoods and their effects on social differentiation in the countryside. And the third problematic is about political power. It relates to the contradictions, conflicts, alliances, compromises between the dominant and subordinate rural social classes, and as well as with them and the other social classes, the urban social classes, and their influence on the state, on the character of the state, and the public policies for rural development and food security, especially, among others. So my argument is that the Chinese path to rural development could be understood as a special sort of state capitalism driving on the international reordering of the food regime, of the international food regime. State capitalism is a very controversial idea. I will not discuss the long-standing literature about that, but just state my own interpretation of it. I don't understand state capitalism as the liberal version who oppose state capitalism to free market capitalism, one being bad, another being good. Like one is a authoritarian capitalism, another one is a democratic capitalism. No, my idea stems from Lenin and Bukharin, who conceived state capitalism in the context of the new economic policy in the 20s in the Soviet Union as a stage within the process of transition to socialism after the conquest of power, in which state capital and the direction in which state capital in the direction and regulation of private capital under party-state control play a strategic role. This is the main idea for me about why I understand Chinese economic social formation today as a kind of state capitalism. Is a moment within the process of capital of transition to socialism. I will not go deep. I will not explain this whole table on international food regimes, but just to state that food regime is a concept, is a theoretical approach developed by Philip McMichael and Harriet Friedman to establish a periodization of the history of modern capitalism through the lenses of agriculture and food. How agriculture and food insert themselves or influence the evolution of capitalism. And the main point is that the current regime, the regime established since the mid-90s, has been influenced very strongly by the entrance of China in the WTO, a lot of other aspects. I will not go into that so deeply here, but just talk about monetary system, the technology, the governance rules of international trade, and a lot of aspects. I will speak more when I discuss empirical issues here. Well, let's go to the first problematic, accumulation of capital. The main idea here is that accumulation of capital in rural China has been developed through the emergence of new corporate actors and capitalist relations of production in the countryside. It is well known that China has been growing, especially since the reforms are opening up, very rapidly and strongly, and this process of economic growth is accompanied by a process of urbanization and the growth of a huge middle class, but also of a huge floating population, kind of urban proletariat that is quite linked to the rural areas, because this floating population, these migrant workers, they generally hold a rural code. It's also in this process China has become the biggest trading nation in the world, and a great source of outward for indirect investment. The case of Belt and Road Initiative is significant in this sense. Well, let's talk specifically about agriculture. My research shows that Chinese agriculture has been transformed by the establishment of 4 tiers of different kind of companies or enterprises that invest and operate in agriculture. The 3 first tiers forms a huge and powerful oligopoly structure in agriculture. And the 4th tier is non-oligopolies. So the first tier is formed by central state-owned enterprises like Sinograin, CA and ABC, and especially ChemChina and COFCO. The first 2 are more policy-oriented, and ChemChina and cocoa are more market-oriented, outward-oriented. ChemChina in the input sector, seeds and fertilizers, agrochemicals, and cocoa in the trading sector. The second tier are formed especially by state farms like Xinjiang, Beidaihuan, Guangdong Farm, Haikan. There are all state-owned big farms which date back to the Yan'an period of New China, but has been corporatized recently. And the third tier are basically private-owned companies, but with strong state support, especially to credits and other forms of financial support. They are called the dragon head enterprises, and their main business is processing the agricultural products, especially meat, and also distributing this process and this product. And by doing this, they lead the processes of vertical integration of agriculture, bringing the farmers together through a kind of farming contracts with these companies. The fourth tier are a non-oligopoly group of companies, millions and thousands of companies actually, formed by specialized agricultural enterprises and specialized agricultural cooperatives. These are basically local level, small and middle local enterprises and cooperatives. That these cooperatives are also divided into two kinds of cooperatives. One is called the fake cooperatives, most of them, the majority, because they are, although they are registered as cooperatives, they act most like private companies, private small companies, and a minority of them are real, genuine cooperatives organized collectively. I have one example here, but I will not discuss now. Let's go to the second thematic. Thematic of social reproduction. It's about the emergence of new food consumption patterns in the rural, especially in the urban areas, and the formation of an heterogeneous and segmented family farming in the rural areas. Well, it is well known that China has been through a process of economic growth and formation of a new middle class. And this is well captured in terms of food consumption by data on disposable income and the Engel coefficient. Engel coefficient denotes the part or the share of disposable income used in consumption that goes to food. So in urban households, in 1990, around 54% of the spendings in consumption from urban families went to food. Today, 2018, it went down to 27%, 27.7%. As in the rural households, it went from 58% or almost 59% in 1990 to around 30% currently. So it means that yeah, people are having more income, eating more, but also spending less with food. And this also has implications on the composition of the Chinese diet. I will not explain again all these details in every product, but here I have a table going from 1990 to 2018, explaining the composition of especially grains and tubers on one hand, on vegetable on the other hand, and on proteins like vegetables, fruits, and other vegetable-oriented products, and meats, eggs, milk, fish, like protein, animal protein products. The main message here is that let's say in 1990, the average composition of Chinese habits, of Chinese food consumption patterns, was around 5/10 of grain, 4/10 of vegetables and fruits, and 1/10 of meat. In 2018, this figure changed radically. Today, urban and on the average, or the national average, Chinese people eat 3/10 of their food basket are composed by grains and tubers, 5/10 by vegetable, fruits, and these kind of things, and 2/10 by meat. Sorry, I was wrong here. 5/10 of meat and 2/10 of vegetables and fruits and these kind of things. So it's a huge change in position of diets. On the other hand, on the rural side, there is a strong process of social differentiation among the peasants. During the Maoist times, or even the first decade of formal opening up since Deng Xiaoping came to power, the Chinese peasantry was quite undifferentiated, quite homogeneous. There was not so much difference among them. But since the last 10, or especially the last 10 years, but also slightly before, there is a trend towards differentiation, towards the rise of kind of capitalist enterprises in the rural areas, capitalist farmers, still a minority, but important in the volume of agricultural produce. The rise of specialized farms and the continuation of a kind of more traditional peasants, but all of them in some way involved in markets. Here is the example of pig production that is probably one of the most striking sectors in Chinese agriculture and husbandry. However, this trend also must be understood in context. Some scholars, some Chinese scholars, speak of a strong process of proletarization in China, and indeed, there are some data showing that today, some estimations, rather say, that today around 16% of the whole labor force in China are organized through wage labor. It was around 8% in 2008. So there is actually a process of proletarization, of increase of wage labor in Chinese agriculture. However, the rest is basically peasant family farming. So this process of proletarization must not be overlooked, must not be exaggerated. Here I have some data, but I will not discuss any one of them, all the details of them. Just take that from a rural population of more than 500 million people, 2010 million units or household units, those who are characterized as family farms or big family farms in China are just 3.9 million units. It must be explained here that in China official documents, family farm is not exactly what we understand as family farming. Family farmer here in Brazil. Family farm is a term who differentiates more specialized agricultural production in relation to the more traditional peasant agriculture. Family farm is a scaled-up farm, still owned by the family, different than most of normal, regular peasants. But they are just a minority in the total universe of agriculture in China, of the rural world in China. But well, I already explained there is this differentiation within the farmers as a kind of scaled-up family farm and a continuation of peasants under the household responsibility system. But all of them, in some way, are a kind of peasant farming. However, with some differences in scale, in the volume of production and capitalization, use of credit and stuff. But there is also some other actors like cooperatives and corporate-led enterprises who organize a kind of vertical integration in Chinese agriculture. Well, what are the implications of these processes in capital accumulation and social reproduction on the political level? What are the effects of it? The composition of China's political power. My understanding here is that it involves a repopulation of state-society relations and a promotion of new food security and rural development policies. Well, there are three main theses on Marxist scholarship regarding the nature and character of the Chinese state today. One is more, let's say, Trotskyist orientation that they say that China has been through a capitalist restoration since the reform and opening up, and that it reflects on the abandonment of socialist perspective. A second thesis is the idea of market socialism. For example, Domenico Losurdo and other authors who understand that market socialism is not the abandonment of the socialist perspective, but the deepening of it. While reason is exalted as an instrument of government, like let's say Xi Jinping as the absolute reason in Hegelian terms. And my perspective that I adopt is that China today is a kind of state capitalism within a wider process of socialist transition, in which the state operates a kind of contingent mediation of conflicts and contradictions that exist within society. The idea of market socialism usually downplays or accounts for a loss of centrality of conflict and class struggle from society. And in my perspective, class struggle is still there, but it is mediated through state action. Use an idea developed by Professor Isabella Nogueira here from Brazil and also Professor Hao Qi, that we have seen since reform and opening up a passage from a transition from the Great Compromise established by Deng Xiaoping to the so-called strained alliance that has been consolidated or that has shown its full face with Xi Jinping, in which, if in the early process of the Great Compromise, it was very stable and all sectors of society in some way agreed to the establishment of political power. In the current moment, the state needs to strike down on some sectors, as we have seen in the financial sector, on the real estate sector, some areas in education and even in agriculture. This transition since the reform and opening up could be understood in Gramscian terms as this transition is part of the passage from a continuous revolution led by Mao, in the Mao era, to an era of passive revolution, using Gramsci idea to characterize the current period. And decollectivization of agriculture could be seen as the matrix of new molecular changes, as Gramsci said. It means that the model established by collectivization served as an example, as a matrix for the other reforms that came afterwards. They used the trends, the patterns established by the collectivization as a model. So the current process of modernization of agriculture serves to updating the Communist Party of China's hegemony. In terms of public policy, we could understand the China national food security policy as a self-confident policy within a successful new mercantilist strategy of integration into the world capitalist system. Furthermore, the policy of rural development in China, especially the rural revitalization strategy launched by Xi Jinping in 2017, could be seen like the internal, the domestic signature policy of Xi Jinping, as the Belt and Road is the foreign signature policy of him. And it works as an adaptable political project whose directions are open to the disputes between different strands of the CCP that that also represents different sectors of society. So you have within the CCP some policymakers with more liberal orientation, whose objective is ultimately to privatize China's land. On the other hand, you have the so-called developmentalists, or basically the mainstream policymakers in China that they agree with large-scale farming and these things and corporate organization, but they are cautious about the effects that it may have on the disintegration of the peasant and the capacity of the urban economy to absorb this surplus population. So they are careful about this, the idea of defended by the new liberals, for example. And we also have the new left, which is smaller compared to especially to the developmentalist strand, but they basically defend that, well, land is not a commodity. It should not be commodified. It must stay collective, and it is desirable that China's agriculture is not organized through the expansion of agribusiness and capital going to the countryside in the sense of capital subordinating the farmers, but it should be a better way to organize the peasants autonomously through rural cooperatives, to genuine rural cooperatives, to increase their bargaining power within the market, as well as their political capacity to influence the Chinese path of development. Well, let me finish. My first conclusion is that the articulation of a new regime of capital accumulation in China is making domestic agriculture indeed increasingly subordinate to the operation of agribusiness companies, and the ability of transnational corporations, of Chinese transnational corporations, to compete in the world market. I have studied the case of COFCO that I can present in the debate with more detail, that exemplifies this very, very, very strongly. Second conclusion is that China is experiencing profound changes in the patterns of social reproduction of both of the urban population, linked to the emergence of new class diets and eating habits, and on the rural population, resulting from the commodification of agriculture. And the third conclusion is that the transitions of political power through the China state reflect the contradictions of the regimes of capital accumulation and the class conflicts linked to social reproduction, which provide the substrate for food security and rural development policies. So as a final message, I believe this kind of analysis, this analysis of the agri-food question, which is kind of a painting of the old agrarian question in Marxist thought, proves to be fertile to explain China's place and the dynamics of the contemporary international food regime, and to examine the possible directions of its so-called state capitalism. Well, I will not go into the details here. If you want to understand more about the implications of China's transformations in Brazil, we can go to visit the debate. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.